Hey guys, welcome back to Honkai Star Rail. In today's video, we're going to be doing a Seele guide. Now, the things we're going to cover in this video are going to be her skills, traces, light cones, relics, Eidolons, teams, and playstyle. And I will have timestamps in the description if you want to jump around. Now, just keep in mind, it is very early days. So keep in mind, some of this may evolve and I will update you guys if it does. But I think in general, all the stuff I have in here should get you pointed in the right direction if you are using Seele. This is not a should you pull Seele video. I will leave that one linked in the description if you want to know about that. This is for those who have already got her. So let's get into it. So Seele is one of only 2 quantum damage dealers in the game at launch, and she is by far the most powerful. She is from the Hunt path, which means normally they specialize in single target damage, but she also deals really well with AoE because of the way her passive works. Now, we're going to go through her skills quickly, but I'm going to spend a lot of time on her talent, jump in and show you guys some examples of how it works, because you can cheese around it and essentially get 4 turns in a row 2 different ways, whilst maintaining a 1-turn buff for all 4 turns. It's quite crazy. We're going to go deep into that because it's something, if you have her and you can utilize this strategy, it's absolutely fantastic. So first of all, we're just going to look at her skills. Her basic attack, like all basic attacks, it's going to have a set amount of damage. Nothing crazy tied into it. Now, with one of her traces, the basic attack will be able to advance her next action forward by 20%, which isn't too bad in certain situations. We'll talk about that more when we get to traces. On top of that, her basic attack is going to generate 20 energy into her ultimate gauge. Then we have her skill after that. Now, her skill is going to deal quantum damage, but it's also going to give her a speed buff of 25% for 2 turns. Now, if you get her to Eidolon 2, that's also going to be able to stack that speed buff up to 2 times, which is absolutely crazy. And this skill is going to generate 30 energy towards her ultimate gauge. Then as we jump into her ultimate, it's got an energy cost of 120. It starts off by putting her in the buffed state, which we'll talk about more in the talent, but essentially it increases her damage dealt and then gives a massive quantum damage nuke. Now, there is a crazy effect tied into this at Eidolon 6, but we'll cover that later in the Eidolon section because I don't think it's going to be applicable to most people. Then we have her technique, which we'll cover quickly. And then, like I said, we're going to spend a lot of time in the talent. The technique is the thing you use outside of battle. It basically puts her in stealth so enemies can't detect you. And then when you enter battle from stealth, you're going to start the battle with her buffed state. Now, the buffed state comes into play when we look at her talent. I'm just going to read it because it's the easiest way to describe it, because I hate trying to summarize it. She enters a buff state upon defeating an enemy and receives an extra turn. While in the buff state, it's going to increase the damage that she deals. Now, it states that enemies defeated in the extra turn provided by Resurgence will not trigger another Resurgence. So that wording is very, very particular, and it's something to take massive note of, because I'm about to jump into the game and we'll show you some examples of how you can actually get 4 turns out of this, because you're not proccing it from the Resurgence. So back in a sec. Okay, so this is going to be the first way that you can get the 4 turns using the 1-turn buff. So something we got to understand is that the additional turns procced by Resurgence and also your ultimate are not considered quote-unquote turns. They won't use up the buffs that you have. So if you have a 1-turn buff and you use your ultimate, it won't consume that 1-turn buff. And the Resurgence proc turns are the same. So that's the first thing that I just want you guys to understand. So what I'm going to do is show you an example here of how we can do this. So I do have full energy, but we're not going to use my ultimate. We're going to be a bit wasteful to demonstrate this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kill this first enemy. So this is going to kill the first enemy, and this is going to proc my Resurgence. So now if we check my buffs, you can see that I've got the Resurgence buff and I've got this damage increase buff, and I've also got my speed buff, which the skill provides for 2 turns. So keep in mind that, look at that speed buff, because that's something I'm going to want to make note of. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use a basic attack on this guy and make sure I don't kill him. So for this strategy, I have to guarantee that this attack does not kill the enemy, and as I'm using the attack, I need to use my ultimate so that I basically use my basic and go straight into an ultimate. I could use a skill here as well, but I just think a skill will kill this guy and I don't want to kill him. So we're going to use a basic attack here, and then I'm going to queue up my ultimate straight away. And as you can see, let's put it on 1 speed. I've queued up an ultimate. So I've done 2 attacks. I did a skill for a kill, and then I did a basic attack. But now my ultimate is not technically the skill provided, the turn provided by the Resurgence. So if I kill someone with this ultimate, then I'm going to gain an additional turn again, which that will bring me to 4 turns. We did the skill, the basic, the ultimate, and then we'll do another one. So let's just use this ultimate to kill this enemy. We'll go ahead. Boom. Job done. 1 time speed is a bit slow. Okay, now we're back in Resurgence. So this is where we're going to go ahead and use a skill. We're going to kill this guy. We'll kill this guy, say, and you'll see that we won't get a turn. But the one thing I want you to note is we've used a basic attack and then we used an ultimate and we still have not consumed 1 turn of our speed buff. And that's what I wanted to highlight here is that these buffs do not get consumed by the Resurgence turns or the ultimate turns, which is crazy. So you can get a 1 turn buff to last 4 turns. So let's go ahead here and let's go ahead and kill this guy. And you'll see that we do not actually get another turn from this. So we killed him. Happy days. We did not get an extra turn. That's because we were in the Resurgence proc. And if we jump over here to Seele, you can see we've still got that 2 turn speed buff and we've got the 1 turn buff because we were still in that Resurgence phase when we used it. And the Resurgence attack doesn't count as an attack for consuming buffs. So that is that one. I'm going to bounce out. I'll show you another situation back in a sec. Okay, here we are. Let's look at another way. Now, there is multiple ways you can do this, but I'm just going to show you another one. Just keep in mind what you want to be doing is not killing with the Resurgence procs, but killing with others. Now, what I can show you here is this is going to be a way where we're going to use our skill and then ultimate, and we're going to sort of queue up 2 Resurgence procs. So then we'll get an additional turn after an additional turn, but they're not proccing themselves. Hard to explain. We'll do it in action and I'll show you. Firstly, let's check buffs so that we got no buffs. We're blank for buffs. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to kill this enemy with a skill, and on my way to kill it, I'm going to use my ultimate. Now, once again, I want to use the ultimate as soon as possible after I click the skill, because if I don't do that and I let the kill first, it will proc me into the Resurgence first. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's go ahead and do the skill. And I'm on my way and I'm pressing that ultimate. So we're going to queue up an ultimate. So let's check here. So if you look at where we're at, we do have the Resurgence buff, but this is not the turn granted by the Resurgence buff. So we can use this ultimate to kill the next enemy, which we will do. So we used a skill to kill an enemy and now we've used an ultimate to kill an enemy. So the skill produced a Resurgence proc, but we killed the second enemy in an ultimate, which also queued a Resurgence proc. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a basics just so I guarantee not to kill this guy. And you'll see that we actually get 2 Resurgence procs in a row. So we're currently in Resurgence. And if we go ahead and do this, basic attack, we don't kill him, but we get another turn because we queued up 2 Resurgence proc, 1 from the first skill we used, and then 1 from the ultimate, which means we actually get 2 additional turns. Now, once again, a similar thing, if I kill this guy with this is the Resurgence. This is the additional turn provided by the Resurgence, even though it doesn't really say Resurgence there. So this will not grant an extra turn. So if we go ahead and kill this guy, boom, we're not getting an extra turn because it was the turn granted by the Resurgence proc. So I hope that makes sense. That's 2 scenarios. There are other scenarios in which you can do it, but the key thing is you've got to be doing the kills independent of the Resurgence procs to make it work. But those are 2 clear ways that you can do it. Hopefully that makes some sense. Let's continue with the rest of Seele. Next up, I wanted to take a look at the traces. Now, eventually you will unlock all the traces if you play long enough, but I wanted to look at some priorities along the way for what traces to get. So first of all, we'll go through the upgrades to your skills. So we have the ultimate, the skill, and the passive, and the basic attack. Ultimate, skill, and passive, all really good to upgrade. No brainers, just pick them up when they're available to be upgraded. The basic you can sort of hold off on, but in general, it's not too bad just to pick it up because you will be using basics from time to time. As we jump into the enhancement effects that we get, every character has 3 enhancement effects. The first one is going to be when current HP percentage is 50% or lower, reduces the chance of being attacked by enemies. Now, this is not really that important. The reason I reckon you want to leave this for probably 2 to 3 weeks is because of these guardian laments. Now, these are really, really hard to obtain. You are limited on how many of these you can attain weekly. So that's why I say in the first couple weeks, you want to save these for characters' skills that really need them. For instance, if you're using March 7th or Natasha, they both get cleansers on their trace. So those are something that you really want to get, and it would suck not to be able to get those things on other characters in week 1 because you've picked up this on your Seele. So once again, something you'll eventually get because it does unlock a really cheap crit damage and attack buff, but early on I would leave this one out. Next up is the Lacerate. Now, as soon as you unlock this Lacerate, I would be getting it. This one is incredibly good. It gives you quantum resistance penetration, which it just multiplies really well. So you really want to get this. It gives you great damage increase. This one's an absolute no-brainer. Then the final one, after using a basic attack, her next action will be advanced forward by 20%. Now, the way those instances of attacks work, you actually still get benefit of this once you go into your normal turn gauge rotation after your additional procs and stuff. But I still think it's one you may want to hold out on a little bit, just because once we get here, once again, you still are using these limited resources, but you're also going to spend a lot of stamina getting 8 of these arrows. So this one, like, you probably won't even unlock this at Ascension 6 until maybe around 2 months-ish in, maybe 1.5, maybe 2.5, depending on, you know, stamina refills and stuff like that. But this is going to take you a while to unlock, and it is a lot of credits as well. So this one, once again, another one that I would put in the not must get, but eventually you will unlock. But I wouldn't unlock it as soon as you get it. There's probably going to be other characters that need theirs more. And it's not just the limited resource, but now it's also about the stamina required to get those arrows, that you might want to put that stamina towards getting another character's upgrade. So essentially, recap on this one. This is a must pick up. Upgrade your ultimate, your skill, and your passive, and your basics not too bad to upgrade either. But then that's about it. You can go ahead and pick up this one. This one's not too expensive. This one starts becoming more expensive as well. So these are later on down the road. But in general, all those attack and crit damage buffs you will end up getting. Next up, we're going to take a look at light cones. Now, if you do go ahead and summon on her light cone banner, that is going to be her best in slot light cone. However, we're going to look at some other free-to-play options as well. Cruising in the Stellar Sea is a fantastic one. You can get this from her shop, and you can also get the materials to get it to Super Imposition level 5, which is completely maxed from her shop eventually. It does take some time, but you can get there, which is really nice. This one's going to give you some solid crit rate, and if they are low, you're going to get additional crit rate, and if you defeat an enemy, you're going to get a ton of attack. So this one's really, really strong, and as we all know, Seele, fantastic at killing enemies and moving to the next one, so she will maintain that buff pretty frequently. And then if I had to give one suggestion for a 4-star light cone, it would be only Silence Remains. The reason being, some of the other 4-star light cones are conditional towards not taking damage or needing buffs to remove from the enemy, whereas this one, it just increases your attack, and if there's 2 or fewer enemies on the field, you're going to get increased crit rate. And although you're not always going to be attacking with only 2 enemies on the field, Seele kills enemies pretty quick, meaning she's often going to get herself to the point where she is also getting that crit rate buff. And if you're scratching at the very start of the game, you got super lucky and pulled her super early, you can throw this 3-star. Honestly, none of them really matter. You're going to get into the 4 stars pretty quickly, but this one, just when you defeat an enemy, you're getting 24% attack. You can superimpose these pretty quick and get it to a 48%. So at the very start, these aren't too bad, but like I said, eventually you will pretty quickly move on, and keep in mind that base stats are important. These do add to the base stats of your character, which all your other multipliers add onto, and that's why 3 stars aren't quite as good as 4 stars, and 4 stars aren't quite as good as 5 stars, because they do lose out on those base stats, which amplify with all the increases that you get. As we look into gearing or relics for Seele, the first thing we're going to want to prioritize is having the right main stat on your sets of gear. So we'll start off with the 4-piece sets. Now, your head is always going to come with HP, hands are always going to come with attack. For the body, we're looking for early game crit rate, and if not, attack. In the very late game, if you get enough crit rate substats on your gear, and also through, different light cones and stuff like that, then you can look towards crit damage, but in the early game, you're probably not going to have crit rate values high enough to warrant that yet. So on the body, we're looking at crit rate or attack. And then on the feet, for Seele, I recommend for most players going with attack. If you're going with speed, she already is a really fast unit, and it can make her skill point consumption a bit tricky to manage. So feel free to play around with it if you do want to experiment, but in general, I recommend attack, but you can play around with speed at some stage if you really want to experiment, depending on your team composition. Now, as we look into the sets, the Genius of Brilliant Stars is going to be the ideal set we eventually want to get a 4-piece of, but keep in mind, like I said, those main stats will be the most important thing, so breaking the sets early on to get the main stat coverage is going to be okay. But this set is going to give you quantum damage increase 10%, and then the 4-piece gives her a 10% ignore defense effect on her attacks, and if the enemy is weak to quantum, it increases that effect effect to 20%, which is really, really nice. Now, another set you can get away with as well is the Musketeer set. Not quite as good, but still pretty solid. Gives you attack and gives you speed. Some basic attack damage, but that's not massive on Seele, but it's more about the attack and speed. And what you can also do is you can split these up and go a 2-piece of Musketeer along with a 2-piece of Brilliant Stars, and you can get some quite good effect. But once again, those main stats are going to be your most important thing. As we move on to the planet ornaments, for the main stats we're looking for from the sphere, ideally we want to get quantum damage. If we can't get that, we can always go for attack. And then on the link rope, once again, we are looking for that attack stat to really stack the damage. Now, as for sets, the Space Sealing Station is going to be one that's really usable and strong for her. You get a base 12% attack with that set, and then as your speed reaches 120, which is pretty much straight away for Seele, she's going to gain an extra 12% attack. So really easy and effective to get that bonus on this one. But like I said, once again, we're looking for those main stats as the top priority, getting that elemental damage, which can be hard because there's so many different elements in the game. We got 7 of them. So, you know, your spheres will get a lot of different substats. So, you know, if you have to, you can drop it into that attack. Now, when we look at substats that you're looking for on the gear, ideally we're looking for things like crit rate, crit damage, attack percent, and speed. And also another one that's not bad because you're not going to get perfect stats on every set piece of gear. Attack is another decent one. As we move into her Eidolons, they're all pretty good, to be honest. We'll go through them briefly. Eidolon 6 is really crazy, but obviously pretty hard to get through. So Eidolon 1, when dealing damage to an enemy whose HP percentage is 80% or lower, crit rate increased by 15%. That's pretty solid, not gonna lie. That's just a solid buff to, especially for bossing and stuff. We know she's good at killing trash, but then she gets that buffed rate against bosses when they've lost a bit of health, which is fantastic. Now, this one is really crazy in general, but also when you stack it with her signature light cone, because that thing gives her more damage based on her speed. But this allows her speed buff to stack up to 2 times, meaning she gets super fast. Now, just keep in mind with this, you are gonna be consuming a lot of skill points with her because she's gonna be getting her turns around really fast. But in general, it is just a buff overall to her. Now, 3 and 5 are just going to be skill upgrades for her skills, so we're not going to look at that. This one, when she regenerates 15 energy when she defeats an enemy, great for killing trash, can get you around to those ultimates faster in trash type phases, not too bad. Then we go to Eidolon 6. Now, this is the one that gets really crazy. So basically, when she does her ultimate, she puts a debuff on the enemy, and then anytime any of your allies attack that enemy, they're going to take extra damage equal to 15% of her ultimate damage. And that's every time they're attacked. So this is actually a huge damage increase for her. And it's also going to be affected by things like how quick does your enemy move after you put the debuff on? How quick are your allies and how many turns can they take? There's a lot of things that affect this, but in general, it is a great buff to the damage overall. As we look into teams for Seele, this is the first team that I think you want to aim towards in the early game. This is just in the early game. Say you've pulled her at the very start. As soon as you unlock Fire Trailblazer, you can use this turtle team, I like to refer to it as, where it's double shielder, healer, and DPS. This is just really solid through the early game, through the main story and stuff like that, because it's just going to ensure that you survive and then you can slowly deal damage. In the early game, we're not worried about clearing things quickly and we want to survive. Now, this is a good base for you to work from. Because Seele is so powerful, you can definitely swap out either Trailblazer or March 7th for another DPS or a buffing unit. I would prefer a buffing unit with Seele personally, something like a Ting Yun if you have her, but we'll look at her in the next team. So you can flex this around. The reason being, Seele is such a strong damage dealer and so good at clearing ads, and she takes so many turns that having an offensive buffer with her can actually be really beneficial even in the early game. But this is my base team that I like to defer to, and then if you're having no issues with survivability, then chuck in some more offensive options. As we look to the later game and we start looking at Simulated Universe and Chaos Memory, this kind of team is going to be fantastic for her. Just a team that's all about buffing her and then bringing a healer. Now, we put Bronya and Ting Yun in this one because Bronya is obviously an amazing buffer. The other crazy thing about Bronya is that you're going to mainly want to use basic skills with Bronya, and that's going to generate a lot of skill points because she advances her own action forward, meaning she's going to have ample amounts of skill points to use on Seele. Now, in this type of team, if you do end up with like 4 or 5 skill points, you can use Bronya just to straight buff Seele, but in general, she's there to basic attack, generate those skill points, and then keep her ultimate up as much as possible. Ting Yun, really good, once again, giving that extra ult so we can ult faster, also increasing the attack, also the added effect where she's going to deal extra damage with her basic attacks. Ting Yun is just a great support for Seele. And then we have Natasha as the healer in this team. That was just a placeholder for a healer. You can also use Bailu if you have her. Then if you don't have Bronya, you could always sub her out depending on the situation for something like a Fire Trailblazer or a March 7th if you need a more defensive option, or if you're looking more offensive, you could bring a sub DPS that's going to help you with break on the certain elements that you're looking for, or you could bring another support, something like a Pella for instance as well. But in general, Ting Yun and Bronya both work really well with Seele because she just does so much damage and they just amplify that. So that is going to be it for Seele. Like I said, it is still very early days, and if we do find out new and fascinating things about her, I will definitely update you guys. But as always, thanks for watching. I hope you have an awesome day, and I look forward to seeing the next one. Cheers.